Hi, hey, I'm Diana, and I hope I don't chicken out of this. Okay, so before the video starts, I just want to say first, as you have probably already noticed, English is not my first language, and as much as I've gotten used to writing and reading English, talking is not my forte, so I'm sorry. Second, speed paints, speed draw, time lapses, whoever you want to call them, have always been my favorite kind of art videos, and I've been meaning to get into it for a long time. I've done some through the years, but I think I've always wanted to do was to do a voiceover along the video, but I'm shy, guys. So let's figure this thing out together and let's see where it goes. So I'm just gonna talk about my process, more specific to how I approach this comic, because it's not exactly how I will do other stuff like illustrations or even other comics. Mostly because with this one I just do a sketch and call it a day. Though there are some panels where I do stuff like I will usually do, mostly whenever I'm struggling with a post, like with April right now. And it's something that happens a lot in this page for some reason. What you see in red are my thumbnails, and this page is already an outlier because for this comic I do the thumbnails on my sketchbook and then I take a photo that looks very shitty on my Photoshop file because it's very small and I sketch from there. Here I did some pages straight on my PC because they weren't planned, I just add them later because I felt there was a story bit missing. Actually, this is closer to what I usually do. I had my thumbnail for composition purposes, my first sketch to figure out the pose, and the second sketch that's cleaner and holds all the details. Then there's the way I drew one. This is the way I do this comic, where in the same layer I start cleaning up the sketch and add details as I go. And thumbnails are just a guide. Sometimes I even fully ignore what I have originally planned and do something else while I'm sketching. And this is my grids. Sometimes I just hand draw them in, and sometimes I do this where I do the grid like straight on and just deform it. I struggle a lot with Donnie's pose and expression here. I don't know why it was so hard for me to wrap my head around. And it's not even just in this panel, in other panels too. I was constantly redrawing the pose and the expressions and looking for reference in my other monitor. This really was the Donnie gave me hell page. And there goes the arm again and again. Something I do with comics and even with illustrations lately is that I draw more than I should. That's not the word. I draw more than what you're actually gonna see on a single panel. Since it's digital, I can use a mask to hide away that later, but doing this helps me to focus on the poses and the composition and flow, and if I have to resize things or move them around for the composition to work, I don't have to worry about like having a piece of missing arm or torso that I have to redraw. Sometimes it still happens if I move things around too much, but it doesn't happen as often. And while with this comic I usually do all my sketching in a single layer, for this page, I was constantly pulling up another layer to do an underdrawing and then sketch the cleaner version on top. Like with Donnie's torso and then with Rap's tail and even with his arm. Since it was overlapping, it's easier to just draw it in a different layer and just erase the rest of the sketch underneath. And then I just mesh those layers together when I'm done drawing the portion. Also here with Rap, since he's behind Donnie, I just did it in another layer so I could move it around easier. And I still try to keep things as tidy as possible. If by the end I can have a single layer with all my sketching is better, especially when I'm gonna have animation, because each frame goes into a single layer and I don't want to end up with a 100 layer mess in my file. And speaking of not making so many layers, I made so many layers for this one. I started figuring out the anatomy of the pose and added details once I have things figured out. I mentally go through like a checklist of details so I don't forget anything, and I still forget to do some sometimes. I forgot to add the ship on one splash on there. I don't remember if I added it in later. The head I drew in a different layer to not worry about what I already drew. Even the hood is in a different layer. Then I can just resize it with no problem and erase the sketch underneath. And the composition was not right for me, but that was a problem for later once I have Donnie drawn in. And like I said, this is the Donnie Gave Me Help page, and I had to redo this pose a few times. I even decided I need to draw the whole thing to make sense of it, even when most of it was gonna be covered. And I drew in all the details, knowing fully well I was gonna erase them later. I changed the head direction to something that did more sense to me, and with that sketch done, I move on to clean it up in another layer. I really like this pose, but I erased most of it. Most of the time when I have two characters overlapping each other, I work on them on different layers, the sketch, the ink, the colors. I just keep them separated so it's easier to manipulate, but since I'm doing this low effort and I'm still adding animation, I just merge them together once I have the composition down. So look and appreciate the full Donnie. You'll never see him again, because here comes one. I moved it around to find a nice way to fit both of them in, but that it still looks like they are interacting with each other. I filled in one silhouette so I could see better what part of Donnie got covered, and see there weren't any weird tangents going on. Then I finally erased the parts of Donnie that got covered, and a part of one scarf. I also did a thicker outline on one, so it was easier to tell apart the two characters. And we reached the Donnie Gave Me Hell part 3, this time because of his shell. That in theory, I know how it works, it's just shapes. The profile of his shell is just a question mark, and the thingies on his back are just cubes. I mean, I got there, I guess. I got it looking somewhat decent, but it still looks off to me. It looks flat and the direction of the cubes are pointing makes no sense, but I wanted to move on, and I still have an animation to do. Oh, and this is the moment I realized how overcomplicated one's back is. And for some reason, for me to wrap my head around it, I always have to draw every single detail, even when I know this scarf is gonna cover it. Me drawing one's back is draw the shell, draw the pattern on the shell, draw the scars, draw the thing that goes across his chest and back, then draw the swords, and now draw the scarf and get rid of everything else you already drew. And I had to move it slightly because it looked like Donnie's hand was hitting the edge of the sword, and we don't want Donnie missing any of his fingies. And we have finally reached the animation part, with a side of Donnie Giving Me Help part 4 because I had to fidget with his expression for a while. So the way I do animation on Photoshop, or at least this one, is I have all the other sketches I did in a single layer, and the part that is gonna be animated, the face in this case, in another. So I don't have to worry about copy pasting or redrawing something that's not even gonna move. And if you look at my layer stock, I have the animation in a folder to make organization more easy. I make one layer for pose A, and then I draw what is gonna be my pose B in another layer. In this case, the two expressions. Now this is just my trail one. I got rid of this one and did another try. But something I did in both is that since it's just a shift on the expression, I copy pasted and move and erase some things like the eyebrows and the eyelids, so I didn't have to worry about consistency. Now the point here is that you can lower the opacity of these A and B layers and draw your in-betweens, like an onion skin. But I didn't like how the expression turned out, so I gave myself a break and came back to this on another day and gave it a second try. I redrew both expressions, and for the in-betweens, I just duplicated my layers and did the same editing like before, moving things around and redrawing them out. For colors, I have these files where I have all my character colors, so I can just pull it up and color pick from there. The way I color is always the same. I just do all the silhouettes on a single color, usually the main color of the character, or in the case for this comic, I just use the lighter shade of gray on my grayscale for everything. Then I just lock the transparency so I can draw outside of what I already did and color in with the rest of the grayscale and the accent colors. For big chunks of color, I just color the edges, select the inside, expand my selection a few pixels to it a bit into what I already colored. This way I get no gaps in my color, and then I just fill in the selection. I forgot to draw the ear part of Donnie's goggles, so I drew it, and his shell still bothers me so much. The perspective makes no sense, I hate it. So to color the animation, I already have the sketch of each frame in a single layer. So I just add a color layer underneath every single sketch and then group them together, so I have a group for each frame with the sketch and the color. Does that make sense? For some reason, I duplicated the color layer of Donnie for every single group instead of just leaving that as a base color and color the eyes in each frame. I did realize it was gonna be easier that way, so I just redid that. I left this panel until the end because I knew it was gonna be very time consuming and the hardest part of this page. Also, I realized this animation was too complicated for me to do in Photoshop, so I opened Krita. Since Krita's timeline works different than Photoshop, where I have to have things in different layers and turn on and off the layers as I make the frames on the timeline, in Krita I can have different drawings throughout the timeline all in the same layer. Does that make sense? I had to rearrange my layers to make the animation work and to have the mask work because they also work different in Krita. And every time I open Krita, I forget how they work. messed up and lost some frames on Donnie's animation, so I have to import the PSD file into Krita again and rearrange the layers all over again. But because I thought it would be tedious to watch, I just stopped recording while I did that, but then I forgot to start recording again. So when I realized that, part of the animation was already done, but you still get to see a big part of it. I started redrawing the poses I had on the thumbnail, and while I'm being more conscious about anatomy and proportions, these are not my priority at first. I'm more worried about the timing of the animation and the flow. Animation down, I can start cleaning up the sketch and adding details. I'm just repeating the same process of all my sketching over and over again throughout the frames. Also, I just wanted to say I didn't whip this out of my ass. I was constantly looking at reference for the kick, looking at videos and images with like the correct poses, and even found some animations on YouTube for reference that I was scrubbing through. Like, big part of my animation process is just watching over and over again what I already did, just to make sure the timing is right. Here I'm just fixing and tweaking the animation, just to make sure it looks the way I want it to look. And the way I organize my frames, at least in Krita, because I can do that, is with the colors. My keyframes I have in red and my in-betweens are in blue. The orange ones are just duplicates that I move around slightly to make a quick easy in and out. I added a pose there because the other two poses were too far away from each other and it looked too snappy when I wanted that movement to be a little bit more slow. Upper's animation was easy to do. I started with just 2 poses, one for her in the air and the one where she gets hit, and I just moved them around and rotate them. At this point my only worry is mainly the timing. So I'm making sure the curve as she comes back down looks good, and the timing as she loses momentum in the air and then gravity starts pulling her down also looks right, and then the direction as she gets kicked out of frame makes sense, and then the frames when they make contact match up. And again, it's just a constant flipping through frames and rewatching the animation and moving frames on the timeline, all to make sure that the timing is right. Once I have all of that done, I start to add movement to April, so I just did a 3-frame loop of her waving her arms around. I did the loop in another layer with April on the same place. Once I have the loop looking right, it's just a matter of repositioning the poses on the pad I have already animated. And of course drawing in the details so it actually looks like April. Oh yeah, I did not want to clean that up. I just moved it on to doing colors. One of my problems with this animation is that the camera position is very boring. I could have chosen a more dynamic angle, or at least add a tilt to the camera. When I was doing the thumbnail, I thought this way was gonna be easier to see what was happening because it helps with the silhouette, but it's also very bland. I tried to fix that later. I tried to tilt the whole animation, but it wasn't looking like I wanted, so I just gave up on that. Then I just had to add the correct timing for Donnie's animation. I pushed it back further in the timeline, so there was a gap with enough time to look at the panels between the two animations. And that's pretty much it. I hope you guys enjoyed this, or that it was at least a little bit educational. It's been a long while since I wanted to do a video like this, but I just keep scaring myself away from doing it. I have more footage saved in my computer of my process that I'll hopefully get around to edit it soon. Might even do another voiceover of it, but who knows, I certainly don't. Anyways, bye. Mis niveles de estrés estuvieron grabando esto. What the fuck?